How would you select the right amount of cleat float for your individual needs? Graham Aubrey, known as the Flying Scotsman, set the world hour record for the second time in 1994 with his cycling shoes bolted to the pedals of his bike. This bizarre manoeuvre would destroy the knees and ankles of the average rider, and now we have significant mobility built into modern cleat systems. Nearly all cyclists will benefit from some float built into their cleat system, but how much do you actually need? Cleat float refers to the amount of rotation left and right that your foot can achieve on the pedal before your cycling shoe clicks out. You might ask, why is this important? Good question, considering that the cleat is supposed to provide a secure connection between the shoe and the pedal. To understand why we need this, we need to know exactly how the joints above the cleat behave. The reason is that the knee and the ankle both move in all three planes, not just bending and straightening forwards and backwards. They also have some twisting motion left and right, and they have some side bending motion left and right. It is easy to see these movements in the spine, for example, but it's a little harder to appreciate them in the other two joints. If the interface at the pedal does not allow this ancillary movement, it can become quite uncomfortable, restrictive, and potentially lead to reduced performance and injury. The knee joint is where the femur, the thigh bone, meets the tibia, the shin bone. At the bottom of the femur, there are a pair of bony spheres called condyles, which sit side by side, and they rest on the tibial plateau, which is essentially a flat surface. There is a meniscus cartilage on the inside and on the outside of the tibial plateau, and they create a little saucer for each condyle to sit in. When your knee is bent to 90 degrees, there is about 45 degrees of rotation available, with slightly more movement outwards than inwards. As your knee gets closer to fully straight, the slack in the knee joint gets taken up and the ability to actively rotate is reduced. However, the knee will slightly and automatically rotate outwards as the tibia must glide further across the inside condyle than the outside condyle. Most of this happens in the last 30 degrees of knee extension, which is beyond the position that most cyclists get to when the crank arm is pointed straight down. So effectively, the shin will subtly start to twist outwards as we push the pedal down, resulting in a foot position with slightly more toe out. The ankle is a complex little area comprising of the upper talocrural joint, and below this is the subtalar joint. The talocrural joint mostly extends up, which we call dorsiflexion, and flexes down, which we call plantar flexion. It also has some simultaneous rotation left and right, and side bending left and right. When we push the toes down, the ankle also twists inwards and side bends inwards, which we call inversion. Generally through the power phase of the pedal stroke, as we push down, the ankle moves from slight dorsiflexion to moderate plantar flexion, moving through a range of about 20 to 25 degrees. As I just explained, this will result in a relative toe-in position at the bottom of the pedal stroke. So as we push the pedal down, at the knee, there is a relative outward twist, and at the ankle, there is a relative inward twist. Usually there is more rotation which happens at the ankle than does at the knee, but the ultimate change in the position of the foot depends on the individual and their pedaling technique. This probably has a lot to do with how much toe down motion you produce while pedaling, which I've already discussed in this previous video. While pedaling, some people move their ankle a lot and some people keep their ankle very still. Cleats can accommodate this varying rotation due to some looseness between the cleat and the pedal. You can tell how much float Shimano and Look cleats have just by their colour. Speedplay, in contrast, has a variable float setting which can be adjusted via two worm screws setting the limit of inward and outward rotation. The maximum float setting on Speedplay is 15 degrees, on Look is 9 degrees, and with Shimano is 6 degrees. Does more float rob you of power output? The jury is out on this one. However, I think it is unlikely, as the force that your leg must produce to rotate the cleat is at 90 degrees to the force it produces to push the pedal down, so the vectors seem unrelated. I think potentially it's the other way around. If you are working at high power output, perhaps throwing yourself around the bike a little, then I think a little extra rotation might be part and parcel of extracting the last final watts from your leg muscles. In this case, your smooth pedal stroke goes out the window and extra rotational motion might be part of the equation. Does less float lead to higher risk of injury? In short, yes, I believe this is true due to the natural rotational movement already described, which happens as you extend your knee and point your toe. If you limit the float available, then you may be altering the natural biomechanical motion of the lower limb while pedaling. Unless you ride with a very rigid ankle without much dorsiflexion or plantar flexion, I think allowing more rotation with a higher degree of float is very sensible for reducing the injury risk. And if you have more freedom of motion and are more comfortable when pedaling, then you will perform better than if you are feeling restricted or uncomfortable. How much does your foot actually rotate while you're pedaling? How would you select the right amount of cleat float for your individual needs? I think it's always safer to have more rather than less float, but if you want a more precise answer, then you need to work out how much does your foot twist while you're pedaling. There is some fancy and expensive technology out there that a bike fitter might have access to determine this, but let's have a look at a simple at-home MacGyver method. For this test to work properly, you must be using the most float possible on your particular cleat system. If you're using Shimano pedals, you'll need to be on yellow cleats. If you're using Look pedals, you'll need to be on the red cleats. And if you're using Speedplay pedals, you'll need to have the worm screws wound all the way out. Then place a strip of masking tape along the center of the shoe, from the middle of the toe box along the middle of the tongue of the shoe. Use a flexible tripod wrapped around your handlebars to point your camera phone directly down at your pedal. If you don't have access to one of these, get someone else to hold your phone there for you. Make sure the lens of your camera phone is right in line with the pedal, not too close or too far away from the frame of the bike. Press record on the video setting and start pedaling, or even better, do a few minutes warm up first and then start recording so that the final footage is more representative of your mid-ride effort. Download the video to your desktop, laptop or tablet computer, then scroll through the video to find the two extremes of foot angulation, one with maximum toe out and the other with maximum toe in. Take screenshots of these and then use an online protractor to measure the two angles. The difference between the two is the amount of rotation that your foot currently moves through. Remember that your left and right foot probably do not move symmetrically, so you may want to check both feet. If your foot rotation is around about the same amount as the designated float of the cleat, then it is not a good idea to use a cleat with any less float. If your rotation is significantly less than what the cleat allows, then you might do okay with a cleat that allows less float. Remember, when it comes time to set up the cleat on your shoe for actual riding, you want the starting angle of the cleat to be midway between the maximum out-toeing and the maximum in-toeing angle, so the foot is not meeting the barrier of motion prematurely in either direction. If you are interested in finding out the most exact way to set up your cleat position, check out my previous video on the cleat key tool. The link is in the description.